So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on a pledge from the Chancellor Rachel Reeves that all the savings that she can find in her budget next month straight into cutting NHS waiting lists. I don't have much detail on that, so let's just hope she's not giving it all to private healthcare. But really, this week is going to be Tory heavy, what with the conference. So let's let them enjoy it, shall we? Let's all go straight to page 11, where there is a write-up of something in the papers yesterday which had my eyeballs popping out like I was an extra in Beetlejuice. The latest from Boris Johnson's not very good, revisionist, untrue autobiography of his disastrous tenure in Downing Street, and it's being taken like it probably is telling the truth in this particular instance. In it, he revealed the late Queen was suffering from bone cancer when she died. Now, Jason, can you take us through this one? It had been alluded to before, hadn't it? But not in quite such definite terms, and certainly not by a prime minister.
No, I mean, it was the first I heard it, and like you, Susie, I was going, "What? Has he just really revealed that?" I mean, her death certificate revealed she died of old age, which is kind of, rather polite, dignified way for a woman who was of a certain age to describe somebody who'd served our country for so long. And then, some kind of maverick, rather desperate former journalist who spent a bit of time being prime minister and he's got a book to sell, has kind of unloaded his notepad into this kind of stream of consciousness gibberish, which is kind of half defiant and half rather pathetic kind of use of kind of excuses that I was wronged, I didn't do anything wrong, it was disgrace to get rid of me. And then my favourite bit in the whole book, when he goes, one of the bits of advice he got from the Queen when he spoke to us, he said, "There's no point in being bitter. There's no time. We should never have. There's no place for bitterness." And he concurs with this, and then writes 500 pages of bitterness. And you're going, no. So he obviously took on board this advice and then completely ignored it. But it is extraordinary. And I was thinking, Susie, I don't know about you, if a former Labour prime minister had revealed the private medical details of a monarch, the right-wing press, particularly a paper called the Daily Mail, would be apoplectic with rage at the indiscretion and the lèse majesté. But in this instance, the Mail, which is serialising Boris Johnson's book, which is unfortunately available in all bad booksellers shops, has just kind of written this up as though nothing happened.
Yeah, and they did the same, I think, with
double standards here.
Yeah, the previous mention, and it was only an allusion, was in a biography written by Giles Brandreth, famous jumper wearer of this parish, who has also written about royals a few times because they've invited him into their inner circle because he's completely harmless. And he did allude, I think, and that was also serialised in the Daily Mail. He alluded in his last biography to the possibility that she may have had bone cancer. Again, didn't land with much of a splash. Boris Johnson's now firmed it up. And as a previous, a former prime minister, he would absolutely know whether that was true or not. And that they were warned for some time beforehand that she could go suddenly downhill at any moment. And it's just one of those things which, if the royal family hasn't made it public, it's probably something that didn't really ought to be said. Does it need to be said? What do you think, everybody? Does it matter that the Queen had bone cancer? If this is true, can we believe Boris Johnson? Who knows? It's difficult to tell. There's been no word from the palace, nor will there be, I should have thought. As you said, Jason, other than the death certificate, she died from old age. Now, if in fact she had myeloma, as it's known, or multiple myeloma, which can be a very common cause of death in older people, Rick says no one dies of old age. Everyone dies of a factor of failing health, which leads to old age, leads to things, bits of you dropping off. So it could well be that death certificate's telling the entire truth, but they've maybe glossed over something. The Queen had purple hands. What does that mean? Oh, I think that's alluded to the fact that she may have been on a drip at some point. She had bruising on her hands towards the end of her life because it's very difficult to heal bruises as you get older. And no one's going to launch a police investigation into this, are they, Jason? Whether or not the cause of death and her death certificate was the correct one or someone's covered it up or anything else. Giles and Boris might both be wrong. She may just have been old age. I can understand why they wouldn't have shared her diagnosis whenever she got that, because it would have caused an absolute kerfuffle. And probably in the immediate aftermath of her death as well, there would have been a lot of to do about it. But now, I mean, why couldn't they just say, yes, it was myeloma and it's a common cause of death for older people? I mean, why not just be open and honest about it? She was a normal human being, after all.
I mean, there is that contrast with the kind of the reserve of the way Her Majesty ruled, and the way that King Charles and Kate have been more open, though not completely open, about their recent kind of cancer. So it is interesting that we kind of times have changed, and perhaps people like to share more now. But she was of a different generation, and I think that may have been deserved a little bit of respect which Johnson doesn't seem to have shown. But then he never has really cared about other people. It's all about promoting.
Put into the comments, everybody.
The Boris Johnson brand. And,
exactly. If you can think of anything Boris Johnson's ever respected, do let us know. We're still looking.
Maybe his bank balance.
Steph says, I don't believe anything that comes out of that man Boris Johnson's mouth. He is a serial liar. Yes, he is. And it is entirely possible that she could have had bone cancer, but just died of old age anyway. It's it's not the main thing. I do think that generally speaking, the royals' death certificates are an edited version that you get to see. So if I'm right, I think I'm remembering they'll tell you the primary cause of death, but not any secondary causes of death that might be underlying factors.
I mean, one of the great joys about this book by Johnson is he kind of, the whole purpose, as far as I can work out, was for him to try and kind of rehabilitate his record, and all it's done, as far as I can see, is draw attention to the fact he was so unsuitable to be prime minister. He's written about this kind of crazy idea that he asked the military whether we could invade Holland to steal some of their vaccines, which he decided were actually our vaccines for that reason. And you're thinking he sees this as some sort of kind of like heroic kind of standing up for Blighty, and you're actually sitting there reading it, going, the guy was bonkers.
Yeah, John says the Nazis wanted to invade Europe.
Yeah, precisely. But and you're going, how did this guy become prime minister? He's so fundamentally unserious and unsuited to the job. And I mean, I kind of think this is kind of it's kind of like it's kind of like the monstrous ego has taken over, and he still can't see his own failings, and trying to put the record straight has actually, if anything, made it worse.
Kind of exactly. I mean, the thing with the invasion of the Netherlands was he recounts a bit in his book about how he mentioned this to, can't we invade? And the military chap in the room sort of goes, well, yes, we could. We could send some boats here. We could send some SAS in there. We could then, exfiltrate with a thing, and we could do that, Prime Minister, but we'd probably get noticed. And just finds a way through it. But in terms of, how bad he was at ruling, and how what you said about how straightening the record actually makes it worse, one of the things which has driven me mad over the weekend, and we're talking about this dreadful book, which isn't in our paper, we're just talking about it at length, so I suppose it is cutting through, isn't it? As he talks about, that his fines for Partygate, and saying, I saw no blooming cake. I had no cake. It's ridiculous. Later on in the piece, he says, well, the press office had put out something about the gathering, but it was a bit slightly embellished. He doesn't say in the book, which is supposed to be the true record of his time in office, that his press office told the world before the Partygate scandal broke, his wife brought him some cake. I mean, it's just like, did any of this happen? Am I living in a fever dream that we've just all imagined that Boris Johnson's own staff told the world he had birthday cake? He then got fined because the police decided he was having a gathering, whether there was cake there or not makes no difference, that was illegal. He presided over the most criminal address in the United Kingdom during his tenure in terms of breaking those COVID laws. And he just goes, what? And I didn't notice any parties. What? And it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. All that anger and rage just sort of bounces off him. How does he How do you do that? How do you have an entire country at your throat and then not notice? I mean, that's a product of breeding, Jason, or is it just immense stupidity? What? I mean, I would be awake at night over that for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily. I think it's kind of, you know, a Johnson gene, so to speak. I think they're all like that. They kind of, you know, have a certain sense of entitlement, and
Yes.
and they you know, refuse to accept, because they have their own moral parameters, that they could ever be wrong, because, you know, they think they have a ticket which says this person can do whatever they like in life without any rules.
Yeah,
and they carry it around with them, waving it all the time, going, "I've got this piece of paper."
Yeah, and that's partly why as well the Conservative Party seems to keep talking about him like he's some kind of successful prime minister because he won a landslide, and therefore we should have him back again. Like, he didn't just lose them that landslide as well, really quite quickly. That bit didn't happen.